الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
As far as Israel is concerned, October 7th is an event on its own. The world started on October 7th. Don't worry what happened before. There is nothing Israel left. Hospitals, mosques, churches, cemeteries, areas where they said you need to move from there to go to a safe zone, and then the safe zone is being bombed as well. Okay, alhamdulillah, rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum to you all. So brothers, as we sit here really to look at the anniversary of October 7th, which is on Monday. So as we sit here today, our ummah, unfortunately, they are trying to dodge missiles, they're trying to dodge rockets, they're trying to avoid Israeli tanks. Some of them are probably even burying their loved ones. They're trying to just survive. That's the scenario they're in. So as we come to the anniversary, unfortunately, Israel's opened up a second front in Lebanon, as the brother mentioned. So when I was preparing this talk, or even when I was thinking about October 7th, I was thinking Gaza, okay, maybe a few missiles from other areas, but Gaza would have been the epicenter. But now it's actually shifted, and this is a question actually. Is it going to become a region-wide war? So when we look at any anniversary, brothers, it's a good opportunity to look at what lessons have we learned. What do we know now that we didn't know a year ago? Who are our allies and who are our enemies? Who are the people, the leaders, organizations who said they supported a particular side? And is that now confirmed, or have we learned the opposite? So anniversaries, whether they're yearly or many, many decades later, it's an opportunity for us to revisit questions. It's an opportunity to revisit loyalties. It's an opportunity to revisit what someone said, and has that borne out, or has the opposite actually happened. So as time passes, we can check evidences, we can confirm things, and we can differentiate between myths and truths. Because when something begins, what you find is people may say something, a ruler or a nation may say something, but as time passes, we can measure, have they delivered? Or did they say one thing and do the complete opposite? So that's why an anniversary is a good opportunity for us to do this. So 1 year on, brother, there's actually many questions that we need to answer. So why did groups from Gaza lead an assault on southern Israel, knowing what the response was likely going to be? Why was Israel caught by surprise? Why? This was probably the biggest intelligence failure from an Israeli perspective. Israel has for years said our military, our intelligence is invincible, and on October 7th they were in disarray. Why is Israel committing a genocide? There's many things they could have responded with. Why a genocide? Which side is the US on? Is the US on Israel's side, or is it not on Israel's side? The best description I've heard is America seems to have a schizophrenic approach to Israel. 1 minute it's criticizing them, 1 minute it's saying it's not on their side, on the other side it's providing them with arms, it's providing them with equipment. So what is the US position? What are the Muslim rulers been up to? Like always, the rulers said a lot, they haven't done much, but let's have a look at this. What have the rulers actually done? What is Iran up to? Is Iran actually at war? Is it not at war? Is it doing a limited operation? That seems to be new terminology now, when you carry out a limited operation. Israel keeps saying we're carrying out a limited operation. Iran apparently isn't carrying out a limited operation. Let's assess this now. Is it limited or not? What are the Houthis up to? The Houthis seem to have shot to fame in the last year. I don't know if you've heard of the Houthis a year ago. You may have. In the last year, everyone's heard of the Houthis. They put themselves on the map. So what are they up to? Why has Israel done so poorly in the propaganda war? I think about the first 2 weeks, all the sympathy was with Israel. More or less everyone believed Israel had the right to defend itself, but today sympathy is completely on the other side. There's very little sympathy for what Israel's done. Why has the propaganda war been so poor? Then a final question people have is, what does the future hold? So people are looking at the Middle East. You know, a year ago, it was all about the US election, who's going to be who's going to be the president. Now it's like, is the Middle East going to burn? Is it spreading? Is it going to turn into a region-wide war? Will it bring in other countries? And when all the global regional powers are involved in a conflict, that's generally what you call a world war. So that's why World War III, the term's being thrown around. So inshallah, in my talk, I want to address all of these. Anything I miss, we can address in the Q&A, inshallah. So why did Hamas do this? You know, Israel is usually quite open. If you attack us, expect the worst. Why did Hamas and why did the other groups do this? And I want to begin with a quote from the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. He said this 24th of October, so a couple of weeks after 7th October. He said, "It's important to also recognize that the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjugated to 56 years of suffocating occupation." So he did something that Israel was not very happy about. Because as far as Israel is concerned, October 7th is an event on its own. The world started on October 7th. Don't worry what happened before. And this was like mass murder. And what the UN General Secretary, so this is the guy whose job is to manage the institute who manages international law, who manages international conflict. He's saying you can't look at this in a vacuum. There is context here that you have to look at. And Hamas, their political wing, they released a document in January this year called Our Narrative. And in there, they go through why they did it, what their thinking was, what drove them to do it. So they've given their side. Because the Western Israeli side is, these guys are just barbaric, they just want to commit mass murder, and they want to do a genocide. And for you to justify it and to even consider and contemplate why Hamas did it, you're with them. So naturally, pro-Israelis, pro-Zionists all said this guy has to resign. Like, how dare he? In fact, they even said he's anti-Semitic. You know, consider this the organization that created Israel, that said that Palestine should be partitioned. They called him anti-Semitic. So why did they do this? Well, if you look at the history of Palestine, what's happened? In 1948, the indigenous people, the people who had been there for centuries, they were expelled. They were thrown out from their lands. Their land was overtaken by European Jews, by Zionists. And many people at that time, they went to surrounding lands, and many of them ended up in Gaza. So from 1948 until the 1967 war, Gaza was managed by Egypt. In 1967, Israel, there was a war, and Israel took it over. And from that point onwards, the occupation of Gaza has been absolutely brutal. In 2005, Israel, they didn't leave Gaza. Everybody says they left Gaza. What they did was they got rid of their settlements and they went to the border area of Gaza. And from that point onwards, they've been doing a blockade. So they didn't leave Gaza. They didn't give Gaza sovereignty. They didn't say, here's the keys, you rule. What they did was, and Ariel Sharon's main advisor, he admitted that the reason why they closed their settlement down in Gaza is from 48 until 2005, what Israel did is Gaza was part of Israel. And what Israel realized is the population of the Palestinians is growing too much. And they're going to have to manage that population. So by leaving Gaza, what they've basically done is Gaza is a special territory, it's not part of Israel. We don't have to give them any rights. If you rule over people who live in Israel, who are not Jews, you have to give them rights. And we all know Israel is an apartheid nation. Like South Africa, you distinguish between the people. And because the Muslim population was growing, and it still is, they had concluded we need to basically give this a special status. So what they did was they left, and they have maintained a blockade ever since. And just the blockade has many aspects to it. One of the things of the blockade is they control the amount of food that goes in. And the way they control the food is they had worked out how many calories each Gazan needs to survive. So they even controlled how many calories you could eat. This was the situation the people of Gaza were living in. They were living in a brutal blockade. The amount of calories they could consume was being controlled. And every once in a while, Israel would mow the lawn, as they said. Every 5 odd years, they would go in, carry out a big massacre in order to weaken them. This was the context. So Norman Finkelstein, the Jewish thinker in America, he actually says that Gaza is a concentration camp. You control how much people can eat. You control who can go in, who can go out. They got rid of the airport. They literally control everyone's lives. Just because you can walk around in the prison doesn't mean you're free. So he calls it a concentration camp. And that's the situation they were living under. So these people had turned to the United Nations. They got nothing. They had turned to the international community. They got nothing. They had turned to peaceful protesting and they'd been massacred. So every avenue they had tried to get their rights, they'd fallen flat on. So this was the context October 7th happened in. It's not randomly people woke up one day and decided we're going to go and kill some people. So these are people who are oppressed, who are prisoners, and they're fighting back. So they don't have an air force, they don't have artillery, they don't have a tank unit, they don't have nuclear weapons, they have nothing people who have been imprisoned have. So what you saw on October 7th was them responding with whatever they had. So what happened on October 7th, brothers, was actually 2 to 3 years in the making. So Hamas has actually gone through how they planned it, what they did, because this gets absolutely no coverage. What you get is October 7th happened, and it was absolutely brutal. So it was 2 years in the making. In fact, what they did for 2 years, they actually carried out intelligence and they actually trained. And we know they trained because many Israelis have said, we reported up to the chain of command that these guys are training and they're doing things which ain't normal. So they reported it, so they were aware that these guys are up to something. But no one at the highest level in Israel took it serious. They thought, what are these guys going to do? Yeah, that came to haunt them in the end. We now know there were 10 groups involved in the Operation October 7th. So it wasn't Hamas, as they say, this was Hamas and everyone's Hamas. It was actually multiple groups. So what they did was they united, they trained, they planned, and they executed this operation. So we know on October 7th at 6:30 in the morning, they did a large rocket attack, and under the cover of the rockets, they broke out from different parts of Gaza. So remember, this is the concentration camp, yeah? They broke out from there and they launched their assault. So their plan was, which they have mentioned openly, and which there is evidence for now, their plan is to take as many hostages as they could. Largely, their plan was to take military hostages, so these are soldiers. And the plan was to take them back to Gaza and then use them to get their hostages freed, which is quite normal, common in war. What you do, you take hostages. And remember, I say hostages. Israel has literally kidnapped people from Gaza and the West Bank. They get taken to detention centers, which are really torture cells. There's no law and order here. There's no court case here whatsoever. There's thousands of people, even kids under the age of 5. So their plan was they would use them to get them freed. Keep in mind, brothers, on the day before 7th of October, unfortunately, the Arab countries surrounding them were all normalizing relations with Israel. In fact, Joe Biden, the American president, and Antony Blinken, they even said to Netanyahu that, look, you know, this normalization, a Palestinian state has to be part of the discussion. That what you can't have, these countries normalize with you, and there's no discussion of a Palestinian state. And Netanyahu said to Biden and Antony Blinken that, what's your problem? The Arab rulers aren't talking about a Palestinian state. Why are you talking about it? So literally, brothers, on the day before 7th of October, the Palestinian people weren't even on the radar. The Arab countries were going to normalize without any discussion of a Palestinian state. So Hamas is still saying today that we had to do something to show them that you guys are talking about us, we're not even at the negotiating table. So that was one of the many motivations to do what they did. So in the end, brothers, Hamas and the other groups, they got about 15 miles into Israel. Now that might not seem a lot, yeah, because I think the edge of London is less than 15 miles, yeah. However, for Israel, who prides itself on being a secure state, from having military invincibility, that's a failure of epic proportion from their side. And in fact, I'll talk later, there's already been one inquiry on why they failed. There are going to be many more inquiries of how that was even possible. So in the end, brothers, the groups, they managed to surprise Israel. Israel was caught off guard. And actually, for the first time in Israel's history, they actually didn't know what to do. They were completely taken by surprise. So if we look at from the Israeli side, brothers, how things played out from their side. So Israel did actually have intelligence that something was being planned. So we now know that the head of Mossad actually gave a presentation in July last year. So a couple of months before it happened. He gave a presentation on the intelligence they've gathered that something big is being planned. But all the heads of the intelligence and the political leadership, they didn't take it seriously. They laughed at the fact that you're saying that these guys are going to organize a proper operation and launch strikes into Israel. I mean, that's never really happened. If you look at the last 2 decades, what you tend to find is rockets get fired, and that's really it. Nothing really happens. So they didn't take it seriously. America provided them intelligence that based on their intelligence, something big's being planned. 2 weeks before October 7th, the Egyptian intelligence, they told them something's being planned. And the worst example I can give you, so you've got Gaza, you've got a concentration camp, and you've got a number of towns and villages around there. And what they have in these towns and villages, they have spotters, mostly these are women. And all that is just keep an eye on Gaza. If you see anything funny, you see any funny movement, you see anything funny happen, report it up the chain of command. So you can be monitoring a town through your satellites, you can monitor it through cameras, you still need people on the ground. So these people were reporting for about a week, something big is going to happen. We can see a lot of movement that's never happened. We now know that the Israeli intelligence said, what do you women know? That's how they literally didn't take it seriously. They just thought this is never going to happen. And this has happened to Israel before, where they never thought the Arab armies could come and do a war with them, and they got caught out in 1973. So that's what happened. So in the end, what actually happened, brothers, when they launched the attacks, because they came from different locations, they broke out. Basically, most of the army that was present in the south of Israel, they got caught on the back foot. We now know most of the Israeli army was in the West Bank. It wasn't in the south of Israel where Gaza is. And one of the reasons why is they were planning a major operation to attack areas in West Bank to turn them into settlements. In fact, most of their army was in the West Bank. One of the ways Israel actually does the occupation in Gaza is it uses technology. So they've got all the big fences, they use camera, they use state-of-the-art technology. So why do you need to have loads of forces there when you've got technology that's going to help you? Obviously on this occasion it was a massive failure. So they got caught out from the multiple attacks. Really, where they got caught out was there was a music festival going on, the Nova Music Festival. And the fact that you've got a music festival going on right next to a concentration camp, that's probably a discussion, another discussion in itself. But that's how they treat it. You've got a torture chamber, and you've got a music festival going on next to it. So music festival, lots of people gathered in one location. Now the Israelis admit there's no way Hamas could have known about that festival. Because it's not like, Hamas, Gaza and Israel on the same telephone lines. They're getting satellite TV from the same satellites. In fact, all the telecoms in Gaza, all the technology, all the masks are outside. So literally every text message, every email, every electromagnetic signal, Israel controls in Gaza. Despite that, it was a massive failure. So because there were so many people gathered in that Nova Music Festival, that was a big Achilles heel for them. Obviously, if they had known this was going to happen in advance, you would have prepared for it. So you find, brothers, I think on Monday, BBC's done quite a few documentaries on the anniversary, and it looks as though they're interviewing a lot of people that were at that festival. So I think about 6:30 in the morning, they saw missiles come over, until eventually they worked out this is actually something big. So Israel got caught on the back foot. You've got a massive music festival going on. You've got multiple bases, they're being attacked. So the soldiers at these bases can't now go to the towns to go and protect them. So very quickly we now know that what they did was they instituted the Hannibal Directive. The Hannibal Directive is a doctrine Israel has, which in a nutshell means that a dead Israeli is better than an Israeli being taken as a hostage. So they've concluded before what Hamas and these groups do, they take hostages, and obviously in Israeli society when they lose hostages it's a big problem politically. So they've got this doctrine that if we ever get caught on the back foot, we implement this doctrine, and what that means is when you target the people doing the assault, if it includes and if it leads to Israelis dying, it's fine. It's better that they don't take an Israeli, because if they take an Israeli, they're going to have to free Palestinian hostages to get that Israeli freed. So the worst example of this was there was the Israeli soldier in the 2006 war that Hamas took. And I think in the end they had to free about 150 Palestinian hostages to get that one freed. So because Israel is such a small population, if they lose one or two hostages, it's a big problem. So even until today, brothers, there are still massive demos that go into the thousands happening in Israel that we want our hostages back. They're doing demos against the government that you're not doing enough, or why you're not entering into a ceasefire agreement. So that was October 7th, brothers, and you find for a few weeks there was a bit of a discussion, how is Israel going to respond? What is it going to do? And for those couple of weeks, really from October 7th to the end of October, global sympathy was with Israel. And you saw straight away the propaganda started as well, about the dead babies, about the sexual exploitation, all of this sort of stuff. So all the sympathy was really with Israel. In fact, Israel at that point could have actually even nuked him, which is what some of the Israeli officials said, we should just nuke him. At that point, the sympathy was with them. But what you find, brothers, is very, very quickly, sympathy completely shifted the other way. And the reason why is the Israeli strategy was very simple. Is we are going to collectively punish the people of Gaza, and we're going to carry out a genocide. That has really been the strategy, and that's still the strategy in place today. Even if you look at the numbers, if you look at the number of missiles fired between Lebanon, Hezbollah, and Israel, they're completely out of sync. From Lebanon, you've had about a couple of thousand missiles, whilst with Israel, it's been 18,000 missiles that have gone the other way. So what you see, brothers, is there's been a strategy of collective punishment. So it doesn't matter if you're a man, woman, child, you're from Gaza, you're part of Hamas, and you all need to be prepared to die. So people keep making comparisons how many bombs Israel dropped in Gaza with World War II. And every other week you find there's more bombs dropped in Gaza than Dresden, more bombs dropped in Gaza than another part of World War II. We now know over 42,000 people have been killed. So I think 1,000 people were killed on October 7th when they did the assault. Over 42,000 people have been killed. And these are mostly going to be men, these are going to be women and children, because most of the population of Gaza is women and children. So everyone has seen, the whole world has seen, the indiscriminate response from Israel. And if you watch the Al Jazeera documentary they've done on Gaza the last couple of days, they go into a lot of detail, and a lot of the evidence they use is from social media posting from Israeli soldiers and Israeli influencers. And the Israelis are very open what they're doing, what they want to do, and actually how they feel. There is nothing Israel left. Hospitals, mosques, churches, cemeteries, areas where they said you need to move from there to go to a safe zone, and then the safe zone is being bombed as well. There's literally nothing they left unturned. It basically you're going to die. And if you don't want to die, you need to leave Gaza. So that's why at the beginning Israel was saying that one of the strategy was, the day after plan, you guys should just go into the desert. Egypt should basically take care of you. And the other strategy they've been doing, brothers, is torture as well. In fact, brothers, on Israeli TV, there was actually some of the people they took from Gaza, they've got a torture center, or they call it a detention center, south of Israel. What happened is the torturing was so bad that the soldiers in those centers were putting it on social media. And what happened is some of these guys were arrested. There was a debate on Israeli TV that these guys shouldn't be arrested because those people deserved it. There was even a protest outside this center that how dare you arrest these soldiers are doing a good job. That's the scenario you're dealing with here. So that's what Israel was doing. What's been the global response? Naturally, when it first started from the West, what you heard was, what Hamas has done is bang out of order, and Israel has the right to defend itself. Israel was the victim, and Israel has the right to defend itself, and we stand with Israel. That was the response. In America, it's been interesting because they've got a bit of a problem. On the one side, Israel's their ally, they arm Israel, they defend Israel. On the other hand, Israel is doing actions that's really making America lose all credibility. And now what you've seen in America, there seems to be a bit of a division in America, even amongst the public. It used to be we give uncertain support to Israel, like there's no limits to our support for Israel, to the point now where there's a large element of the society saying that there needs to be restrictions. And if our support for Israel is they could do whatever they want and they're carrying out a massacre, that's not something we actually support. It's got so bad now that Israel actually had to do a lot of action in America in terms of within the media to try and actually deal with that, which they've actually struggled with. So what you find is American officials come out and criticize Israel, but then behind the scenes they arm them. Then when they arm them, they restrict some of the arms. Then on the other hand, they still say we support Israel. So it's been a very, if you're the global power, you're supposed to be the country that is the adult in the room. You're supposed to be the one calling both of the parties to the table. You're supposed to be the one accounting the one who's gone too far. But what you find with America is what side are you really on? Are you with Israel or are you not with Israel? Because on one hand, they say Israel has the right to defend itself. On the other hand, they criticize them. When they criticize them, they're still arming them on the other side. Then they said they're going to restrict the arms. So it's a very confused perspective for them. And remember, America's supposed to be the superpower. You're supposed to be the more powerful country. You find on the other side, brothers, in the West, countries like Germany, countries like the UK, countries like France, they all come out in support of Israel, but a large chunk of their populations are on the other side. So if you look at in this country, you've had demos that were going into their thousands against this Israeli policy. But one of the reasons the UK had to get rid of some of the export licenses is because of public opinion that was actually going on. So these countries who for long supported Israel, they're now in a position where their own public, non-Muslims, are like, if our support means they're going to carry out massacres, we don't support that. Now that's something unique, because that's not really happened in the history of Israeli-Western relations. The general thing has been we support Israel, Israel has the right to exist, two-state solution, and you guys are the extremists. What you've now got a scenario is there are questions being asked of Israel, which have never been asked before. There are questions being asked, should we really be supporting Israel if this is what they do? So what you're finding is you have a scenario where the elites and the political leaders have to support Israel, but their people are completely on the other side. So this division has never been there before. Just I forgot to mention this, in America, brothers, the State Department, they're the diplomats. They're now admitting that we have been completely sidelined. They're submitting reports to the White House, they're submitting reports to Congress, explaining what's going on the ground, explaining the atrocities Israel is committing, and basically they're being completely shut out. So I think there's been about 2 or 3 guys that resigned out of what was going on, and they actually went public with it as well. It seems to be the defense industry in America, they are completely in bed with Israel, because obviously they're the ones arming Israel, and they're the ones that make money from it. So you've actually got a division in America. And that's why you're finding different people in America saying different things, different officials are saying different things. And it's election year as well, which probably doesn't help in the US. So that was the West, brothers. What's the Muslim response been? What's the Muslim countries doing? This is the Middle East. It's large, 400 million, I think, Muslims there. And in fact, even the West are like, okay, what are the rulers saying in the region? So I think it was about a week after October 7th, Ismail Haniyeh, who's passed away now, he visited Tehran, he visited Ayatollah Khamenei, and Ayatollah Khamenei said it to openly that because you didn't tell us, because you didn't inform us, you're on your own. That's what they said to Hamas at the beginning. Hassan Nasrallah, he went on TV and he said that if this expands beyond Gaza, then we will do something. Meaning that if this doesn't go beyond Gaza, don't expect anything from us. In fact, brothers, for the last year, more or less, when Gaza was being bombed back to the Stone Age, Iran and Hezbollah did a lot of talking. They didn't actually do anything. The only time Iran moved was in April, when Israel bombed the embassy in Syria. That was when they moved, and that was when they did all that drone attack back in April. So for 6 months, when Gaza was being bombed, they did a lot of talking, they didn't actually say anything. If you look at Hezbollah, what they were doing is in the northern areas, there's a whole area where you've got North Israel and South Lebanon. There's a whole large area where there's still question marks of what's Israeli territory, what's Lebanese territory. So there's been a lot of tension like for decades over that. Hezbollah fires some rockets, and every once in a while Israel does something as well. So until recently, that area where Hezbollah has technically been at war with Israel, there was action going on there, but it didn't go beyond there. Hezbollah wasn't firing deep into Israel. They weren't even targeting their military bases. Only in the last couple of weeks now, it's actually grown. So what's happened from a Hezbollah perspective is they didn't get involved in Gaza. Because if you think about it, brothers, if Israel's gone into Gaza, if Hezbollah opened up a front in the north of Israel, Israel now has to fight on two fronts. Israel has to divide its army. That's a problem. But Hezbollah didn't do that. And because Hezbollah didn't do that, now the war's come to their doorstep. And obviously you've seen what's happened the last couple of weeks. The group's been completely decimated. So what they basically did is they stood out of the war, and now the war's come to their doorstep. And now they're fighting for survival, actually. That's actually what's happened to them. Turkey. Erdogan has for over a decade said he supports Palestine. He said many things in support of Palestine. So now the Palestinians need you. Now our brothers and sisters in Gaza, now you need to deliver. And what Erdogan has done is delivered a lot of fighting talk, but he hasn't physically delivered anything. That's actually that's the best summary I can give you of what Turkey's done for the last year. There's other things Turkey has done. So for example, over half of Israel's oil goes through pipelines that go through Turkey. That pipeline's still running. In fact, probably the oil or the petrol in the tanks that have gone into Gaza are coming through the pipeline that go through Turkey. Unfortunately, for the last 6 months, the trade between Turkey and Israel has actually gone up, not gone down. Whilst most of the world is boycotting Israel, Israeli products or products linked to Israel, that's not what's happening in Turkey. So what Erdogan has done is what he has always been doing, which is, I support Palestine. He will even criticize Israel, but it doesn't go beyond talk. Now, if he did go beyond talk, this would completely change the dynamic. If you look at Israel, brothers, its longest borders with Jordan, it's got Lebanon in the north, it's got Syria, and it's got Egypt. So these are the countries that surround, these are the countries that, in theory, have a border with Israel. So if these countries did anything in the last year, this is a massive problem for Israel. But they haven't. And Israel hasn't had to think about, on our border, something might happen. So that's why Israel, everything is done it with the confidence. We don't need to worry about the regional rulers, they're not doing anything. And, well, it seems to be, America tells us not to do something. We manage to convince America we need to do this, and then America supports us anyway. So from an Israeli perspective, this is like the ideal scenario. All the goals they've had of Greater Israel, expanding their borders, now you've got the opportunity to do it, because America seems to keep saying yes. Even when America says, no, don't do this, they seem to just join them in the end. And the Muslim rulers aren't doing anything as well. In fact, none of the rulers, apart from criticizing Israel, has physically done anything. In fact, we find out, brothers, now in Jordan, they actively participated in targeting the missiles that have been going to Israel. So the last two times, in April and then this week, when Iran targeted Israel, Jordan was involved in making sure those missiles don't get to Israel. So Jordan has been actively helping the enemy. And Saudi Arabia, I'm sure you saw it last week, MBS put his cards on the table. I don't really care about Palestine, but my people do. That was his position. In fact, Israel said to him that, the normalization talks, let's put it on hold. And he was like, no, let's continue. So the Israelis recognize, how can we do normalization when there's a war going on? He said, no, I want to continue with the talks. That's the leader you have in the Hijaz, unfortunately. So that, unfortunately, brothers, has been the response of the Muslim rulers. So the Muslim rulers should be representing the Ummah. They should be representing the sentiment of the Ummah. But what you find is they are either actively joining Israel, or they are not utilizing the tools they have at their disposal to impact Israel. That's what these guys have actually been doing. So that's physically, brothers, what's been happening for the last year. Now, the other aspect of the last year has been the information war, the propaganda war. Now, that's been a key aspect, because when you're talking propaganda war, what you're talking about is hearts and minds. How do you want the world to feel about this? How do you want people to actually see it? And what you find is obviously Israel has done a really, really poor job, and we can discuss in the Q&A why that is. But there's a couple of myths I want to address because these have been quite critical to Israel's war effort. The first is from day one, Israel's been saying, and the West has been saying, look, Israel has the right to defend itself. Israel was attacked, and everyone has the right to defend themselves. And the argument they always use is, if somebody was throwing rockets at your house, what would you do? Right? And that line of argument only works here if you forget the whole of history, if you forget everything else that's happened. If you purely look at Israel, Gaza, forget everything that's ever happened, that argument stands. But as the UN Secretary said, yeah, you've got to look at the context. And the context here is that the occupiers is Israel, and the people oppressed are the Palestinian people. In fact, even international law, brothers, recognizes, it actually recognizes armed assault if you're under occupation. It actually legally recognizes, in fact, it says you can do armed assaults, you should do armed assaults if you are under occupation. So you know when Israel says we abide by international law, every attack we do, we check international law. If they actually attack international law, you're the ones who are the occupiers. What happened to you on October 7th is legally allowed. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean we accept everything that was done on the day. But again, what you find, brothers, with propaganda, yeah, is it sounds right. Yeah, it may even seem okay, but when you look at it from a broader perspective, it doesn't add up to scrutiny. And that's the nature of propaganda, because you're lying, isn't it? What you're saying is, we were attacked. If you were attacked, would you not defend yourself? Now that sounds fine. But what they haven't told you, so who's the one that started it, and who's the one responding? The Israeli propaganda here is, we were attacked, we're the victims, we're only responding. When actually, this is what, over a century old, this conflict. This conflict started in 1917, when the British came over and said, we're going to give this land that doesn't belong to us to somebody else. The problem got worse in 1948, when Jews from Europe came and kicked out the indigenous people. And since that point onward, what you've had is a slow motion expulsion of the people. That's the context. And that's why you find some Jews who are quite honest, like Norman Finkelstein, who will say, this is a concentration camp, and these are people responding. And the example he uses is this American context, that when you had slavery in America, every once in a while the slaves would respond, they would fight back and then carry out a massacre. But nobody looks back and says, the extremists, the terrorists were the slaves, they were the victim and they were fighting back. So there's no context to this. They are Israel is the occupier. Israel is the one in the wrong, and the Palestinians are the one responding. And it's not the Palestinians that have a tank unit. It's not the Palestinians that have an air force. It's not the Palestinians that have nuclear weapons. Like, when you're saying you're under attack, you're the ones with the capability, you're the ones with the weapons of war, it's not those guys. The other myth that they've said is that Hamas deliberately targeted civilians. In fact, the whole goal of October 7th was they wanted to carry out a genocide. So what they did was they targeted civilians. And then you see all the videos from the villages, the towns they went into, on the roads, and they keep showing this again and again. But interestingly, there's already been a number of investigations into a lot of these myths. Some of them are by Israeli human rights groups, some of them are by international media. So an investigation by the Hebrew newspaper Haaretz, they concluded that at least half the people killed were not civilians, they were military targets. And in fact, they found from their research, and so this is an Israeli newspaper, they found that there was no one killed under the age of 3. But remember, they killed babies, they beheaded babies. Yeah? That was one, because the whole idea here is, remember, Israel was attacked, they're the victims. Yeah? But remember, a large chunk of the agenda of the assault was to target the military bases. Now, Israeli military bases are not randomly in the desert. The way their bases are organized is you've got towns, you've got to have a military base very close to them, next to them, to defend them if there's a war. So obviously, if you were part of the assault, the likely chance that you had to go through towns to get to the military bases. The likely chance is the military bases are in the town, so you have to go through the town. So their argument here is you deliberately targeted civilians. Yeah, there's actually no evidence for that. In fact, what we now know, half the people that died, and Israel still hasn't provided a complete list of the deaths. Still to this day, we don't have a complete list. This is, Haaretz is, because they're from Israel, they managed to get access from it. But even they admitted in this research, we don't have the full picture. This is just a small percentage of the picture that we've got. Yeah, and there's a reason, and we'll look at this. Why didn't Israel give the full list? The other myth is, and you still get it today, is a sexual violence on the day. That what Hamas did is that they raped, they pillaged, they gang raped, they did all this sexual assault. And this is something that's bandied around again and again. Biden even said it. Anthony Blinken even said it. When Biden was questioned on the evidence, he had to retract it in the end. And in fact, at least 6 months after, most of the media seems to have accepted there's actually no evidence for the claims that were made in the first week. Unfortunately, people still throw around this particular claim. So this allegation of sexual violence, brothers, you find that a lot of this is based on accounts by survivors. So the survivors are the evidence. You've got the first responders, so the people that got there first when all the deaths happened. So some of these are the evidences, and then the dead bodies as well. So the evidences for this argument are the survivors, the first responders, and the dead bodies. So the first time someone did a bit of research on this, and it got global coverage, was in December. The New York Times, they did an in-depth investigation, and they published their findings in an article called Scream Without Words. And in there, they accused that there was mass rape of women by Hamas on their fighters on their day. However, subsequently, the three authors, it was revealed that one of them was a former Mossad agent. So a Mossad agent is writing an article, and they say, these are my findings. Now, that's not, that's you can trust that account, can't you? So that was basically completely undermined. The second, and a lot of the funny and the really, really out of context accusations, they come from an organization called Zaka. So what happens in Israel is when there's deaths, they have a voluntary organization whose job is to organize the burial. So I suppose we don't have an equivalent in this country. The equivalent in this country would be the mosque. But the mosque doesn't organize the burial. The mosque just does the janazah, they do the washing of the body. In Israel, what you have is you have a non-profit voluntary organization. So whenever there's any deaths or even mass deaths, they turn up, they deal with the bodies because they deal with it from a Jewish religious perspective. So most of the allegations of rape, mutilation, it came from these guys. But what we found out subsequently is this organization was on the verge of insolvency before October 7th. One of the co-founders, there was two co-founders, one of them had already been done for pedophilia and corruption, and he was forced to resign from this organization. This was just like a week or two before October 7th. And eventually, when a lot of journalists were able to go to Israel and they followed up these claims, what they found, most of them were false. Most of them came from these guys, and they can't even be verified. The other thing was all the allegations, all the organizations afterwards that have said there were examples of sexual assault, none of them have carried out forensic investigations. What all of them did, they turned up, there's dead bodies, there's pictures, there's marks on them, they must have been raped. That's not evidence. Even the UN sent a body there, and I can't believe I heard this, the lady's sitting giving a report, and then one guy just says at the back from Reuters, so did you guys see the bodies? No, we didn't, because Israel didn't have access to it. Did you see any forensic evidence? No, we didn't. Did you speak to any of the survivors? No, we didn't. So on what basis are you arguing there was sexual violence? And her argument was, from all the social media coverage and some of the meetings we had in Israel, there's more chance than not there was sexual violence. That's the argument. No one's seen a body, no one's checked a body. The funny thing is, everything's there. The Israelis aren't giving them access to it. So that means there actually isn't any evidence for the claim that you're actually making. Unfortunately, as you have in propaganda, if you say something enough, it gets stuck and people start to actually believe it. So in just June, a couple of months ago, brothers, the Times, they published a detailed investigation that looked at Israel's claims of the scale of sexual violence, and they concluded that all the claims don't add up to scrutiny. This is 1 year after. So obviously, there's a whole propaganda war going on, and there's actually loads of more detail you can find out online about this, inshallah. The other accusation you hear, brothers, is mutilation. So this is the famous 40 dead bodies, 40 dead babies. They're talking about their heads being chopped off. They talk about how they threw them into ovens. So again, all of these allegations, brothers, you find come from that Zaka organization again, which isn't trustworthy. It's not even a credible organization. The Intercept, the online investigation portal, they called into question most of the claims about this. So they actually said that, look, you've got to take into account that the Hannibal Directive, I'm sure you've seen these images where you've got a whole road and there's cars stacked on each other that seem to have basically burnt out. Now, just have a think, let's just do a homework on how's that possible. You're going to need some serious heavy weaponry to do that. That is not a clash and cloth job, is it? That is not I've got a gun and I've carried out a murder and then all of a sudden you've got all these burnt vehicles. What that is, very heavy weaponry. And all the videos we have seen from October 7th, so the videos from Hamas, because they videoed it on the day, and the videos that have come from the Israeli side, what you see is all the Hamas guys are either on gliders, or they're in motorbikes, or they've got their handguns, right? So how did that happen? How did all this damage happen? Well, they implemented the Hannibal Directive, which meant helicopters turned up with their heavy guns, and they did what they did. So how is it you've got homes that have collapsed? How is that possible with just a handgun? That is the Hannibal Directive. So what more and more journalists have now come to the conclusion that a significant number of deaths on the day weren't by Hamas. We don't know the number yet, but there would have been a decent amount that were from Israel themselves. And if they implemented the Hannibal Directive, it's absolutely possible. So if you saw last week, Low Key was on Piers Morgan's channel. And he raised it to Piers Morgan, and Piers Morgan couldn't come up with any evidence. He tried to ridicule it, but he couldn't. But they didn't come with heavy weaponry. Because remember, if you're operationally, you want to take people as hostages, the more heavy stuff you take with you, the more you're going to get bogged down. So the whole idea is you don't take heavy weapons, so you have maneuverability. You capture people, you take them back. So even if you take away everything else, it doesn't even make sense from what their strategy was to even have done that. The 40 beheaded babies, brothers, being traced back to an Israeli reserve settler and a former soldier called David Ben Zion. He's historic. You can even find online. He's even incited violence against Palestinians. He's even called for the West Bank to be completely burnt to the ground. So basically, brothers, mutilation, 40 beheaded babies. We've not seen any evidence for it. If you think about it, brothers, if this is called into question, surely the easiest thing for Israel to do is, here are the names, addresses, parents of 40 babies who were beheaded. That would be the easiest thing to do, isn't it? But in fact, Western journalists are saying that even we've gone to Israel, there's a lot of stuff they're not allowed to see. So you've got a lot of this propaganda. The final one I want to just touch on, brothers, is you're seeing it already with Lebanon. The Israeli argument is, when October 7th happened and we went towards Gaza, there was a fear Hezbollah might open up a front in the north of Israel. So to deal with that, what they did was the Israeli towns that were near the north, they got 60,000 of them and they moved them to temporary accommodation. So they're now saying, we want to send them back. It's not safe up north Israel because Hezbollah is there. So this is the argument. We have to go into the south of Lebanon and create a buffer zone so we have security, right? Let me explain that to you. That's like France saying, Cornwall, Brighton, Essex, we want to turn that into a buffer zone so we have safety. That is literally what these guys are saying. Lebanon at some point begins, Israel ends. So all of that area up to Israel is another country. Israel saying, no, because we want security, we want 20 miles, no one lives there. So their operation is, we have gone into Lebanon now to make that a reality. Now, nobody would accept that. If Mexico said, we want the southern areas of America for safety, America will laugh at them. If America said we want southern Israel, and there's an argument because all the cartels are there. This is literally the argument they're making, that for our security, for Israel's security, these things have to happen. These are the sort of stuff they're finding about. So that's why when you scratch beneath the surface, these really don't even add up to scrutiny. They've stopped using the argument, do you condemn Hamas? That was the main argument at the beginning. No matter everything said, do you condemn Hamas? Some people still say it now. It just doesn't stay up now. People can see what Israel have done. Like Hamas isn't even the biggest thing here. Or the latest argument I hear sometimes is, do you believe in the right of Israel to exist? Remember, again, forget context. So you find all of these questions when they're thrown at you, all of them are is put your brain aside, forget context, do you condemn it? And nobody wants to openly come out and say, I support Hamas because of what's happened. And nobody wants to say Israel doesn't have the right to exist. So what have we learned, brothers? 12 months, a lot's happened. There's a lot of stuff I haven't covered, which we could talk about. What do we know now that we didn't know 12 months ago? Well, brothers, despite everything Israel's achieved, yeah, it's turned Gaza into rubble. It's starting operations in the West Bank. It's launching assaults into Lebanon. It carried out the pager attack where it killed it injured 3,000 people. Let's just say very, very high tech. Israel is not any safer today. Israel is not any more stable. Neither is it any more secure. So despite all of that, despite all the killing they've done, they're not thinking, job done, man. Now we can live in peace. Now we're safe. They're in an even worse position. Now they're worried, what if Iran knocks a few more missiles over? So despite everything they've done, it still hasn't brought them the peace and security that apparently they're after. I mean, we could discuss the debate, is that really what they're even looking for? So despite all of that, they still haven't got peace and security. So when America said we're going to go and democratize Afghanistan and Iraq, and it went on for decades, in the end, when it wasn't achievable, what did they do? They legged it. They left. So despite everything Israel's done, and you will hear things over the next few days, you will see videos, and some of them are really gut-wrenching, yeah? Remember, the reason why Israel is doing this, they are not even remotely closer to it. If all of this was to get more stability and more peace and be safe and have more security, they are not even an inch closer to that, despite a year of the atrocities they've committed. Brothers, our brothers and sisters in Palestine, they've suffered a lot in the last year, but they've been suffering for decades. From an Israeli perspective, we brutally occupied you for decades. We've been even more brutal for the last year. In their mind, why don't you guys just leave? Leave, it makes it easier for us. We can take over this land, we can have greater Israel, which is what our agenda always was. But despite all of that, brothers, our brothers and sisters still aren't leaving. Despite they're using white phosphorus, I heard the other day. Despite the bombings, if you watch the Al Jazeera video, you know, they said a few times, a few of these officials have said Palestinians are human animals for what they did. You know, the people that call them human animals still treated them way more better than they've treated the Palestinians. And if you watch that Al Jazeera documentary, it will show you, despite all of that, despite what's happened to them, Palestinians are leaving. That's a problem for them. Now, what do? You've massacred them. The whole world's watching. The UN's watching. International humanitarian law can't touch them. They can do whatever they want. Despite that, so if you're feeling demotivated, if you can't watch TV, just think about the Palestinian people. They're still there. They're still staying it out, and that's a massive problem for them. So Israel might on Monday sit down and say, you know, we've come quite far. We achieved a lot. That's actually not what they're thinking. They're thinking this ain't finished, and actually the Palestinian people still aren't going. So despite, you know, mowing the lawn, as they say, despite the massacre they've committed, they're not going anywhere. Brothers, we have this scenario where the Israeli people who were victims of a genocide, the Holocaust, you know, so they've been through the process. You know, millions of their people died. They were put in concentration camps. They were gassed. Yeah? We are in a scenario where these people are now on trial for committing a genocide. That is the world we live in. The people who were victims of a genocide are on trial for committing one. Just think about that. If you're a Jew, you know, Jews have probably they probably know people in their family who were victims of the Holocaust. How on earth can you be committing a Holocaust? They're on trial for that. That's the world we live in, right? So that's actually a massive problem for Israel. And in fact, their narrative has been, we're victims. We're trying to survive in this region, which is very difficult. Now you're on trial for, basically, they monopolize the word Holocaust. Holocaust, in fact, they don't even like when you mention another war and call it a Holocaust. Now they're being accused of perpetrating another Holocaust. I mean, it doesn't even matter how it turns out. The fact that you're on trial is bad enough. So they are being accused of being genociders now. Remember, genocide was Hitler, genocide was Stalin, genocide was concentration camps. They're now on trial, and they're going to have to defend themselves that the actions they are doing are not genocidal. That's a scenario these people are in. I mentioned before, brothers, Israel has lost the propaganda war, and it comes down to something very simple. Israel's telling the world what's going on. But what people are hearing is completely different to what people are seeing. What people hear is Israel defending itself. Hamas are the terrorists. They're the extremists, they're genocidal. That's what they're telling, and that's what people are hearing. What people see is Gaza in rebels. What people see is convoys of food, and Israeli settlers and Israeli soldiers don't let them in, so now you have a man-made famine in Gaza. That's what people are seeing. So the reason why they're losing the propaganda war is very simple. People have seen through their lies. People can see everything you've always been telling us for decades. What we're seeing is the complete opposite happening. If you take your mind back, brothers, I think about a year or two ago, there's a town called Sheikh Jarrah near Al-Aqsa. And it's where you had that Jew saying to the sister, if I don't take you home, somebody else will. So I don't know if you guys remember that. If there was no social media, we probably would never have heard about that. Because you wouldn't hear about that on mainstream media. Now, the genocide is being televised live. People are hearing it, seeing it on social media. In fact, brothers, if you watch that Gaza documentary from Al Jazeera, all the evidence is social media posted by Israeli soldiers and Israeli influencers. So you've got the guy saying, we need to torture this guy to kill him and send a message to all the other Gazans. He's saying it out of like arrogance. At the trial, at the International Criminal Court, all the evidence that this is a genocide are statements that Israeli officials said. If you remember at the beginning, we need to bomb them back to the Stone Age. If you remember, they compared it to a biblical story, Amalek. Everything they've said is now being used against them. So that's why there's very little sympathy with Israel. And in fact now, it got so bad that when Biden restricted the sale of certain bombs to Israel a couple of months back, Israelis in America, pro-Israelis in America saying Joe Biden's anti-Semitic. I mean, just think about how ridiculous that is. The guy who has said if there was no Israel, we would have created it. The guy, he's probably the oldest, I think he's the oldest senator in America. He's been in Congress since the 70s. He's been an avid supporter of Israel. They have to accuse him of being anti-Semitic now. Like, that's how poor their propaganda is. Now, I actually think what's happened, brothers, is they just never prepared for this thing. They never prepared where they have to explain themselves. Usually the way it would work, BBC journalists would say, you bombed that centre, why? Oh, we had intelligence, there were Hamas operatives there. And the journalists would be like, oh, okay. And that would be the end of it. Now what's happened here is, if you're a journalist, you look stupid if you don't question the Israeli. In fact, some journalists are like, are you taking me for a mug? And I just don't think they're prepared for this day where they have to justify themselves. So what you find is the Israelis get emotional. And now what you find is they're actually struggling now. The officials that come on TV actually struggle because even journalists take them to town. So their propaganda war has been a complete failure. And why? People can see what they're really about. Even, brothers, to give you an example in my workplace. So there's people, they don't have a dog in this race. They're not pro-Palestinian, they're not pro-Israeli, pro-Jew. Even they are like, Holocaust was bad. Look, two-state solution is not great, but it's probably the best we can get. Even they are saying Israel's gone too far. So these are neutral people. I mean, your propaganda war has to be really bad if it's got to that stage. So despite having all the resources, despite having all the support, people can see through what they're saying. Literally, people are hearing from Israel, what they're saying is completely different. The other thing, brothers, is when the Holocaust happened and all the trials happened after that, all the laws we have in international law to do with genocide, a lot of them are based on this can never happen again. Like, never again. Like, how is this possible? The genocide has been televised live. The West are not doing anything. The international institutes are trying to do stuff, but the global powers get in the way. So what this shows you is, and everyone's come to this conclusion now, is that the global order really was things that suit the West is a good thing, and if it doesn't suit the West, they're going to look the other way. So it means the global order is a complete failure. The global order, international law, was supposed to stop these things happening, but it can't. So the global order that we've all been told you have to live by, the rules-based order, you have to follow international law, all to do with trade and economics, that order that's gone down the drain. Now everyone can see the reality for what it is. The fact that a small country of 9 million people can get away with a genocide and you can't do anything, that order isn't even worth the paper it's written on. And everyone can see through that. And it's not just on Palestine, brothers. Ukraine happened. It was supposed to stop something like Ukraine happening. So you've had Ukraine happen, international order couldn't do anything. You've had Palestine happen, it couldn't do anything. So the international order's taken a big hit. So for the West, if you're going to support Israel, fine. But it means you're going to go down the drain with Israel as well. You're undermining everything you stood for. So I want to end here, brothers, with a final point, inshallah, that we have been here before. Al-Quds was lost in our history once. It was lost for 88 years. We're about, 70 odd years through this now, so we've been here before. This isn't the first time. However, there are lessons we can learn from what happened before and how it was dealt with. Because the similarity is actually quite shocking. How on earth is it possible that this region, which is surrounded by Muslims, and you have a foreign entity, just come and set up there and survive for this many years? How is that physically possible? It's possible like it was possible at the time of Salahuddin Ayyubi. It was possible because the rulers we had then, unfortunately, were petty rulers who weren't united. And in fact, when the Crusades came over, they joined them, thinking it would be good for them. And that's exactly what happened with Israel. European Jews came over. The rulers collaborated with Israel. The rulers normalized relationship with Israel. So that's why for 88 years, the Crusader state was able to survive, and that's exactly why it's still surviving today. The rulers weren't united. They were too busy fighting each other. So then what they would do to fight each other, they would even unify with the Crusaders, which is exactly what we saw with Jordan this week as well. So what Salahuddin Ayyubi did, and what the rulers did before him, was they got rid of the problems. So Salahuddin Ayyubi, before he even attacked Jerusalem, which was under the Crusaders, the first thing he did is he dealt with the rulers around Palestine. He got rid of them. He went to war with them. Because the way the Crusader state was able to survive was it was getting support from Europe, the Christian church, and the rulers, which is exactly what's happening today. Israel gets support from the West, and because the Arab rulers normalized relations, is able to survive. So until you don't get rid of these rulers, the supply line will allow them to survive. And it was even worse than it is now. Some of these rulers became agents for the Crusader state. What they would do is they would collaborate and undercover support him because they thought it was good for them. Which is exactly what our rulers do today, which is what the Jordanian ruler does, which is what the Saudi ruler does, but he has no shame, he does it openly. He openly says, I want to support you. The other thing Salahuddin realized is these Crusaders, the towns around them, they were all trading with them. So, food, these sort of things. So he realized, until I don't cut this supply line, this state can't be ended. So the way he cut the supply line was he overthrew the rulers. So that now meant when he goes to war with the Crusader state, they've got no support from any ruler. They're getting no food, they're getting no arms, they're getting no equipment. That's how he dealt with them. Yeah? And then the other thing he realized was that the Crusader state was really just a forward base for the Christian church. What the Christian church wanted to do, because it was so far away, they wanted to establish a stronghold there, and then they wanted to expand. That was the agenda. That is exactly the reason why the second Crusader state was created. Israel was created, why? Because for the Europeans it would be a forward base in this region. So Israel is a problem and we need to deal with that. But Israel's supply lines all go to the West. Without the rulers in the region and without the Western support, Israel doesn't exist. So Israel is obviously very arrogant about this. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. But when it goes to war with Hezbollah, it needs resupply straight away. Constantly, every week, America has to send arms. They can't survive. Jordan's got the longest border with Israel. Egypt, the south of Israel, is linked to Egypt. If these borders were opened, if the armies were sent in, or even if the people went over, how many fronts is Israel going to fight on? So what Salahuddin Ayyubi showed us is get rid of the rulers who collaborate, then you can deal with this foreign entity. That's how you actually deal with it. And they occupied Palestine at the time for 88 years. It took 88 years to liberate it. We are 75, 76 years into this. So there's lessons to learn from it. And so this is not the first time it's happened to us. It's happened before, right? And it's shocking, the similarities. Just, the disunity, the rulers collaborating, the West supporting it. It's literally, this is just two. What Israel is a crusader state. Is there to serve the West. And that's why, America, why do they keep supplying it? Because for them, we gave birth to this state. It's our child. We have to protect our child. It's a spoiled child, they realize that. But it's their child. So as far as they're concerned, we have to defend our child. Yeah? The child has now grown up and the child's a bit spoiled. So what does the child do now? He answers back. The child, why are you not giving me supplies? So it's not like they're united, yeah? It's not like they're in bed together. But that's how you actually deal with this scenario. So that's why, look, Hezbollah can fire a few rockets. That would not be the end of Israel. Even although Israel argues we're under an existential threat, they know Hamas, Hezbollah, these groups, they can't end Israel. The real issue for them, which they don't have to worry about at the moment, unfortunately, is countries like Egypt, Jordan, Turkey. If they change their view and do something about it, there is literally nothing Israel can do. And remember, America has to fly its planes in these bases in the region. Our rulers have given them bases, and our rulers allow them to land their planes there. If that didn't happen, it completely changes the status quo on the ground. So that's why, brothers, despite everything that happened the last year, and some of it's really difficult to watch sometimes, they are not celebrating in Tel Aviv. They're not thinking we are now surface secure, now we've normalized. They are still more worried. In fact, their feeling now is, with what Iran did, it might get worse. And the fact that Israel is expanding the war, they know that even the rulers who support Israel, they know that people aren't behind the rulers. The fact that MBS has to say, I don't care about Palestine, but my people do, that just confirms in Israel's mind, these rulers might be collaborating with us today, but these rulers could be easily removed, and the masses aren't with them. So I'll end there, inshallah.